Good day and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. In this video we're going to talk a little bit about stat gain and essentially how you should use stats in World of Warcraft Mists of Pandaria Remix. So let's talk a little bit first about stats and how you get stats in Mists of Pandaria Remix. So your main variants of stats are from your cloak, huge chunk of stats, okay, secondary stats, main stats, stamina stats, primary stats, everything there. You can see there intellect, stamina, crit strike, haste, leech, mastery, speed, versatility, experience threads. These all come from threads of time, which you pick up from quests, raids, dungeons, mobs, etc. They're completely randomized. If you roll a new ult, you will get some threads from your cloak, but they are only put into your primary stats. The other way you get is from gems. It's very important to understand that only prismatic gems will give you stats. These stats will scale based on the quality of the gem, maxing out at an orange rank gem, which requires 3 purples, and will be based on the item level of the piece of gear you're using. Something super important to understand when you are looking at stats is mastery, versatility, crit strike, avoidance, leech, and speed all have different scaling rates. A great example is this. Okay, so if we take a look, for example, at this piece of gear, we can see that I have a versatility gem, I have an avoidance secondary stat that the piece of gear has, and I have a mastery gem. Now, mastery provides exactly double the amounts of secondary stats as the other secondary stats. So versatility, crit, etc., haste all give you half of what a mastery gem does. This is very important for later on when we discuss what stats to use. At the same time, you'll notice that the stats that the piece of gear is giving me, avoidance, is also different to the stats that the gems are giving. It's slightly higher. You can see this in evidence by the chest piece as well. In terms of the chest piece, you can see that crit strike being a half of the mastery amount, versatility being slightly higher, but then I am also getting 11 speed, which is half of the crit strike. So speed is half of crit strike. Another one that is very important for this is leech. So for example, we replace the speed gem with a leech gem, and we apply it, you will see that I'm now getting 42 leech. So leech and mastery are double, whereas speed is half. Versatility, haste, and crit strike are all exactly the same in terms of value. If we look at a armor gem, okay, so if we remove leech, we apply an armor gem, we'll see that we are getting 24 bonus armor. So armor is kind of in its own category. It is very important, okay, that we understand these when we now start to talk about what stats to use. So before we talk about the final step on what stats to use, we just need to understand that trinkets, neck, and fingers or rings are also going to constitute a huge chunk of your secondary stats. Now, before you can talk about what stats to get, there's 2 very important factors that you need to understand. First is soft capping. So soft capping exists when stats cannot go more than a certain percentage. A great example of this is critical strike. You can continuously stack as much critical strike as possible, but eventually you are going to get to the point where you have 100% critical strike. You cannot crit more than 100% of the time. The same can be said of haste, the same can be said of mastery, the same can be said of versatility. There are also the concept of, those are hard caps. There's also the concept of soft capping. In World of Warcraft, stats get diminishing returns after a certain point. Traditionally, this is 30% and 60%, but it's very important to understand. You are going to hit the soft cap on all of your stats. If you play long enough between your cloak and whatever stats you put in these rings, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have balanced soft caps on all of your stats. If you play level 70 and do raids and things like that, you're going to end up naturally super OP. But there are 3 stats that are, well, 4 stats that are very important. Firstly, okay, Mastery is very important because it can overscale. So it can in effect infinitely scale as a stat. Leech is very, very important as it can provide a ton of healing towards yourself. Self-healing is a very rare stat as well, and because of the way it scales with Mastery, also can be well over 100%. And then Avoidance. Avoidance does have a soft cap, but Avoidance is actually also the only stat that you cannot get with Prismatic Gems. So you cannot get Avoidance with Prismatic Gems, you also cannot get it on your Cloak. Very interestingly enough. Right, now in terms of which stats to follow, when you start the game, you don't need to panic too much. Generally speaking, your traditional stats that you would pull on any character will do well. For example, if you're playing a spellcaster, going haste, going crit strike, and going versatility are going to be fine for your early game. Same if you are playing, for example, a Brewmaster Monk. If you are looking to go Brewmaster Monk, you're going to want to go for versatility and crit strike. Okay, essentially, all of your stats are going to balance out. Okay, if you start to go super early on, you are going to cash out. There are some exceptions for early game. So in the early game, like I mentioned, Leech and Speed can be very, very strong because they enable you to heal and they enable you to move very, very quickly. These things can come in handy, especially if you're doing solo content, as you'll be getting predominantly enough stats from everywhere else to have fairly high stats across the board in terms of your class. Secondly, as well, as I mentioned before, Mastery is going to be a very super important stat for late game. Right, so in the early game, you're looking for Leech, you're looking for Speed, you can grab Mastery as just kind of like a default, but you want to stick to your traditional stat splits. Okay, you generally want to be, traditionally your normal stat splits. However, if you get gear that has Avoidance on it, that is gear you may want to consider keeping, especially if it's blue or purple gear. Okay, armor as well counts very nicely as well. These will just prevent you from essentially taking lots of damage, as they'll scale really, really well, and you can't get them from anywhere else. Well, especially armor, it does not roll on the Cloak. It gets added from the Cloak, but not a lot. And then, as I said, Avoidance. Then Mastery, versatility. So it's very, very interesting how the stat system works, because you're going to be soft capping on crit, haste, versatility, pretty much once you get to max level. So it's a very interesting kind of situation where now your primary stats that you're focusing on are going to be Leech, Mastery because of infinite scaling, Avoidance, and Speed. So it's a very, very interesting situation. Ultimately, early game, don't panic too much. Focus on traditional stat splits. Maybe grab Leech if you want to, and Speed if you want to. But for late game focal points, Mastery, Leech, and grabbing Avoidance and whatever gear you can, because it's the only way you can get that stat, is going to be a high priority. And yeah, so that's it from me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have any questions about the stats and how best to use them. I hope this video has helped you out. Ideally, because of how Mists of Pandaria works, you are going to be pretty much soft capping very, very early on into your max level experience. So I wouldn't worry too much about getting specific with it. However, as you level, keeping to your traditional stat splits while keeping an eye on the long-term, Mastery, Leech, etc., can work out for you quite nicely. But that's it from me. Bye.